Well, I'm done with this job now, and I thought about making this clip the last one, but I think I'm going to make it the first one of this video. This 1991 C4 coupe that I've had for about 6 years now. It's got about 140,000 miles on it. And accessory bracket braces, there's 5 of them, 2 of them on this side of the car and 3 of them over on the AC compressor bracket. All 5 of these braces were missing off of this car when I bought it, and I didn't know it. I did have trouble breaking this bracket that sits down underneath the air pump. That one broke on me. The bottom of the alternator broke on me as well. And what tipped me off was all of a sudden the serpentine belt didn't work very well anymore. So I started looking for braces. I found this brace right here by accident. I thought I was ordering that brace. I ended up getting this brace, but I needed it because this bracket had cracked before and I had to buy a new one. So that brace is now in place. This brace right here that goes from the back of the alternator down to the exhaust manifold, I actually built that myself and put it on the car. Over on the other side, the AC compressor. I was fortunate that I never had any trouble with this, but I just don't run the AC very much at all on this car anyway. But there's actually 3 braces on this air conditioning compressor. And this one right here goes down to a stud on the exhaust manifold. There's one right there that actually, you see that nut that goes on the inside of the bottom bolt on the front AC compressor bracket. It bolts up to that stud on the bracket as well. There's one way down underneath, and you'll see that later in the video here. But if you're having trouble with your serpentine belt or breaking brackets, you need to make sure your braces are on the car. Well, I'm in the process of installing a number of engine accessory bracket braces that for some reason the previous owner had taken off of this car. And one possible reason that might have happened is if they had put headers on or whatever, because some of the brackets mount to exhaust manifold studs like this one right down there. If you don't have these brackets or these braces in place, what happens is these brackets crack, and then your serpentine belt will stop working correctly. And that's what happened to this bracket. You have to look closely to see the cracks, but right down here, there's a crack there, and it's actually cracked all the way around this boss. I think you can see it there. Right there's the crack. So anyway, went on to eBay, started looking for braces. Thought that I had bought one for an alternator to exhaust manifold, one that goes from about there to there. What they actually sent me was this one here. And so if you look at that, that's bracing off this air pump bracket, and that's the one that cracked, this one right here. So if that brace had been in place, this bracket probably would not have cracked. But when it did, this thing kind of sagged forward, and all of a sudden my serpentine belt wasn't long enough. Another thing that happened was the bottom of this alternator broke as well. And so anyway, found that brace on eBay. If you don't have it, you need to get it on there. Thought that I had bought the back alternator brace, and I had not, so I actually took some scrap steel that I had and made this brace, and it goes down in this neighborhood here. Connects from a bolt up on the back of the alternator down to the exhaust manifold. These 3 braces here are for the air compressor, or not the air compressor, the air conditioning compressor. The bracket that holds that in place. This long one goes from the bolt head side of the top rear mounting bolt down to an exhaust stud. This one here goes from a stud on the water pump and this end connects to the thread end of the lower front air conditioning compressor mount. This one right here, I haven't got it figured out yet. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the air conditioning compressor off and see if I can figure out where that thing goes. Well, I took the air conditioning compressor and unbolted it with the 4 mounting locations right there off, and took the serpentine belt loose, and then wired this thing up out of the way, connecting it up there. And interesting thing about these bolts that bolt the compressor on, there's 3 of them that are this length, and there's one that's a little bit longer. It's longer, noticeably longer, and it goes in the lower front one, and that's because another bracket, that bent one that I showed you a little while ago, connects to there, and then a nut attaches it, and then it connects to that stud right there. I've got to take that nut off of that stud, I think, and then put the bracket on, then rebolt it. Meanwhile, with that air conditioning compressor up out of the way, I think I've finally got this thing figured out. And it actually sits like this, and this end connects to a stud on the mechanical fuel pump block off plate. And a friend on the Corvette forum kind of tipped me off to that, WVZR1, thanks. It's very congested down in that area. It's going to be hard to get that part bolted on, and I don't even know how well the video is going to show this, but was an empty hole, and you can kind of see it right there. There's an empty hole there on this bracket for the air conditioning compressor, and I think that a bolt goes through there and runs into the nut. It's a metric nut on the end of that, and then that end there connects to the stud on the fuel pump block off plate. I don't know how well you can see this, really hard to see, but there's a fuel line right down there too. Gonna have to somehow try to push it out of the way enough to get that bracket over that stud, and then a nut on it. So it's really congested down there. I can see why somebody in the past never bothered to put it back, but without that on there, it's gonna put extra stress on the on this bracket and potentially break it. So I'm gonna try to get it on there. Well, this is really hard to see, and I apologize for that, but it's just the way it is. So to get your orientation, there's the air conditioning bracket, and zooming in down there, you can see that black piece of steel. That's a 1/2-inch rod. That's a brace. It's right down there. Right there, I think is the 5/16. I think that's 5/16 NC thread. It's a stud that blocks off the mechanical fuel pump that's not used on this car. And up on the other side of it, how well you can see that, but let's see. Okay, right there, that black nut is welded on the other end of that brace, and so that attaches with, I believe, an 8mm metric bolt. And a couple things that I've got that's helping me out a little bit. I've got this surgical tool right here, kind of opens and closes, and I've used that to place a lock washer on the end of that fuel pump stud. I don't know if it's supposed to have a lock washer or not, but as much trouble as it is to get anything down there, I'm going to put one on there. And then I think I'm going to have to go after, I can't get my hand anywhere close to that, so I've got this, I don't know, about 18 inches of 3/8 extension, a wobble end on the extension, and then a U-joint on there, and hoping, and then I've taped in that nut because I'm sure it'll fall off too. So what I'm going to try to do is get the nut started on there, and then pull this back out and remove the tape so that the tape doesn't get stuck in the wrong place. So anyway, that's my goal. So I've had reasonably good luck at installing these braces. This one that I didn't know where it went, and we figured it out. I don't know if you can see that nut right down there. That's on a 5/16 stud on the mechanical fuel pump block off, and it goes up and connects up kind of by where the tensioner is. I don't know if you can see that empty hole right there. That's an empty hole right there. I've got to buy a little bit longer number 8 metric bolt to go in there and bolt that one up tight. And meanwhile, up to the front of the engine, this brace right here, one end of it connects to a stud kind of in the water pump area, and the other end comes up back to in the back of the bolt, the lower front bolt on the air conditioning compressor. And that's why that bolt's longer. Out of those 4 bolts, there's one of them longer, and the reason is because it goes through the air conditioning compressor, screws into that bracket, and then the long threaded portion sticks through the black part of that bracket there, and then you put a nut on the back side of that. So right now I've got that brace in there just kind of loose. The first thing I'll do is once I get the compressor back on, then I'll run a nut down on this end of it and tighten it up, and then tighten that end of it up over there. So pretty congested here. Hope it's working for you, fellas.